So, first of all, we're on the other side of it now, right? What's your take on what happened in the lead up to it?
Oh, in general, what have happened was very much expected. I wouldn't say that we saw something which came out of a sudden, that, I said, wow, that's a sensational thing, that's what nobody was thinking about. Obviously, some people were still hoping that Ukraine would get something more, like conditional accession to NATO or something like this. But I personally never thought that it was feasible. But what happened, I think that for Ukraine is good. Ukraine got more weapons. Ukraine got consolation of the biggest hurdle on the way to NATO. There was a council between NATO and Ukraine formed. There were security guarantees that were given by G7 countries, very weak, but nevertheless, again, it's a step in the right direction. So things are moving. Actually, what I would say was probably the most important thing for us is that I start to feel that the question of regime change in Russia after the war and in general discussion of post-war Russia is no longer a taboo. And what many of my friends who were present at the summit were telling me that such discussions, not obviously on the official level, but on the fields of the summit, they were happening, and that's probably the most important outcome for us.
Yes. So I want to come back to that. Obviously, that's a big topic for you and I today.
Mm-hmm.
But I still want to drill into what happened at NATO a little bit for those of us who were, we're armchair observers of this. We're not insiders, right? So was the drama between the Biden announcement, Ukraine's not ready, and Zelensky's, he didn't quite pound his shoe on the desk, but it was close. I mean, was all this just stage drama? Did everybody know? Did President Zelensky know that Biden was going to make this announcement? Did Biden know that President Zelensky was going to respond strongly so that they could come to a satisfactory terms? The drama was Tuesday, and then on Wednesday it was kind of a love fest. Was this all staged for the world's benefit, for Putin's benefit?
No, I don't think that definitely was staged for Putin's benefit, and in general, I don't think that Putin benefited from anything there. Frankly speaking, I don't understand well the position of the U.S. leadership. I think that especially in the spotlight of the upcoming elections, the current administration could have been way more upbeat. And the fact that they were one of the most conservative parties at the summit, because they could always put the blame that we want Ukraine in NATO. Look at Hungary, that's
Yes.
we can convince them, and that would be fine, because Hungary is against the Ukrainian accession to NATO, and they are friendly with Putin, and so that's what nobody would give a second thought about. But what's going on inside the American leadership, that's for me is a bit weird, and why they started partnering with Germans. Maybe Germans asked Americans, so that's guys, don't make us look bad. Let's play a coherent violin, all together. I don't know what was the reason, but yeah, I was a little bit surprised, not very much surprised, because I know that the significant part of this administration is very cautious. But I think that people like Mr. Burns, like Sullivan, they still hope that at one day they would need to negotiate with Russia, and that the war has no clear military solution. There would be no unilateral victory by Ukraine, and they want to keep doors open to show that they are reasonable, like, pragmatic. Maybe that's the main idea, but I don't think that it's necessary at all.
So let's now segue from that into a discussion of, as you said, it sounds like on the floor of the NATO summit, the topic of post-Putin Russia is no longer taboo, to use your word. Why do you think that taboo is lifting now? Is it a function of time? Is it a function of what? What are the events that make this the time for that to be a topic that can now be discussed?
I think that we need to thank Mr. Prigozhin for this.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, I think that the main thing is that people saw that at least it is in certain circumstances realistic, because previously the usual take that I heard in Washington D.C. is that okay, so you are thinking, you are dreaming, you're asking us to help, but it's totally unrealistic. There are no forces which can replace Putin, and military defeat of Russia is highly unlikely. And that's why let's not waste our time on such potentially toxic and dangerous subjects, but let's think about how to make Kremlin bleed the most, how to hurt them as much as possible, and then we can negotiate the best conditions that could come after the situation would eventually come to stalemate. Right now, they at least saw that with a relatively minor force, which obviously Ukraine has, and which even Russian volunteers which are fighting inside Ukrainian army is quite possible to get in a absolutely foreseeable future, that even this force could be enough for the changes in Moscow. And in this situation, if there would be certain uncertainty, instability for whatever internal reason, then this final push, this death blow, could be actually enough to overthrow the government, and that we shouldn't discard such a possibility, because at the end of the day, Ukrainians may decide to help with this just by themselves, and that's why the world needs to be prepared for such an outcome. It still is not seen by many as the most possible outcome. It's like a minor probability, but nevertheless the probability.
So what happens from here? I mean, in my experience, there's a little bit of a, once the shell is cracked, the egg is going to come out of the shell, right? I mean, there's no or there's no putting the genie back in the bottle, to use another analogy. I mean, do you think now we begin to see an acceleration of this conversation and it moving up the ladder to higher and higher levels of leadership? And if so, what timeline?
So timeline is the most difficult question.
Mm-hmm. That's why I ask you every week.
Yes, absolutely. And I keep asking everybody and myself, when this whole thing would happen, because in the world capitals, August, as we understand, is the period of vacations. Yes. So the governments after the summit, it's another week, 10 days, and they would start to vanish. For 5-6 weeks, there would be nobody present. and in Poland, our key ally besides Ukraine, there is an election period, which also would make all the politicians very much distracted. These elections are very competitive. It's not clear who would win. Right now, they absolutely appear the opposition and the ruling party. And these all are factors which affect the timeline. Obviously, we will try to push it as much as possible, and I think that no later than August, we will see another major military operation by the Legion Freedom of Russia inside Russia, and it would be a larger scale operation than it was before. It would be another step of a favorite word in Washington DC, escalation.
Yes.
But for me, it's a positive escalation, obviously. But nevertheless, that would be a step forward, and I think that may accelerate the discussion as well. Also, I think there is a lot depends on the position of the Russian opposition, because still the opposition forces are very much fragmented, and this phenomena of an armed resistance appeared new for many, and it's gaining momentum. More and more people are starting to join our position right now. I would say that among the general crowd of the Russian opposition, I would say that maybe half already support the armed resistance per se, but they still are not sure whether the Legion is the right horse to put their bets on, whether it's large enough, whether it's real, what are the plans, and also there is a problem of political competition between different opposition groups, and many of high-profile figures, they still are reluctant to express their support for the Legion, which to me is a shame. But I think they are coming to this idea, and I think that also it's not very far away when they would join our fight.
You told us a few months back about a meeting you were at of Russian opposition leaders in Berlin. Is there another meeting like that, either virtually or in real time, planned? As a group, are Russian opposition leaders looking ahead to, we need to keep meeting and we need to keep talking?
Oh, yeah. Obviously, Khodorkovsky is planning another meeting like in Berlin for September. I haven't heard anything about the particular dates, but such thing is coming. I see that President Macron wants to organize a certain summit in Europe, most likely in France, obviously, to discuss about freedom, future of Russia, with the inclusion of the Russian opposition. I think that's also coming. But we'll see. Again, here, what matters is the initiative, and the initiative in fighting primarily.
And so one of the things that was interesting to me, and I'm sure a lot of other people, is during the 24-hour Wagner mutiny, it appeared that there were Russians on the street in support of Prigozhin. And I wonder if, look, I mean, in the West, I'll speak for myself, I can't look at Putin or Prigozhin and say, oh, I'm going to choose a clear preference for myself. I mean, you know, both of them are bad choices, right? But the fact that Russians were actually willing to go out and support someone other than Putin, do you think that makes it easier for them to then do it again if there's a third entity or a third person that they can support against Putin? I mean, is that a break in the chink in the armor of the wall?
Look, I think that what we saw in Rostov is exactly what we saw in Belgorod region. Russians, a lot of Russians now, would support whoever is against Putin, but who represents the force. one of the main reasons why they don't support Russian opposition is because they don't support
Of
victims.
course. Yes.
And they need to see armed people. They need to see people who can protect them, who are responsible for the wars. And Russian opposition, talks a lot and does very little.
Yes.
And that's what general perception of what's going on. And they were meeting our guys with the same passion as they were meeting Wagner troops again. They don't care because they didn't understand who were Wagner guys. They didn't understand who were we when we were coming, obviously, because, Russian television is not speaking about this, but
Yes.
they understood that they speak in the same language. So they're one of us. They are not coming from Mars or from NATO or from United States. They are ours,
Yes.
and they are ours, but they want a better life for Russians, and that gets us popular support.
And how much does that matter versus the support of oligarchs?
At the initial stage, that matters very little. I don't think that matters much, because at that stage, what would matter is how many people would be ready to join the fight.
Yes.
Take a rifle or a machine gun and go with us. And obviously, it's a minority, but that would matter a lot after the change. After the change, the new government, the new authority needs to be perceived by Russians as, again, ours. That they are not outsiders, outlanders, they are not conquerors, but
Yes.
they're the liberators.
Yes.
That's very important. And that's why we shouldn't break this trust. We should, from the very beginning, and that's one of very important things that Congress is doing with all the legislation. We need to show people that we are on their side, and that we would act against the oligarchy, against the kleptocracy, that we would fix the most urgent social issues which were not fixed under Putin, that we really are doing things in their favor.
I want to draw a distinction between your popular Russian, your average Russian today, and your average Ukrainian in February 2022. Your average Ukrainian, I've learned from you, had weapons and was ready to use them, was comfortable with them, had trained themselves or received training to use weapons. But your typical Russian, I'm guessing, has never held a weapon in their life unless they've done military service.
Oh, many people, I would say most of people, have done military service. So
Okay.
we still have a conscription army. So
Yes.
that's why majority of Russians did, male half of the population, they did hold the weapons. But it's different. I agree that with Ukrainians, it was more customary to have something at home. In Russia, it's pretty customary. In Siberia, for hunting purposes, like whatever, but in the central Russia, not so much. One of the things that actually Congress wants to legalize is to make a similar provision like the Second Amendment in the United States. It was a debate on this, but we do think that would be very positive for the society. Again, that's a feeling of security and that the power is in their hands. But right now, yes, it's not so usual.
So someone or a popular uprising against Putin will have a mix of people who you could give them a weapon and they would know what to do with it, mostly men from this conscripted army, and others who perhaps can just, throw a homemade bomb through a window or something like that. I mean, coming from the US, I don't have any experience on how you convert a mob who has no experience at being a mob into an effective mob. And I don't know how much time you've spent thinking about that or talking with the Legion about how you make that happen. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about it.
Well, look, this is some debate which is still ongoing among ourselves. And again, as in general in Russian opposition, there are two main factions of people who are for non-violent protest and
Yes.
for the armed resistance. Within armed resistance, there is a group which stands for a mutiny or a coup-like style operation, and the full-scale revolution and things like this. I personally tend to stand on the former position rather than on the latter. Despite that, I always believe in people's power, and revolution doesn't scare me at all. Vice versa, I think it's a very positive thing. And I always dreamt about a revolution, but at this very moment, I think that Russia would way more likely face the political process like it was in February 1917, when there was something happening at the top which triggered the processes, and then they couldn't control the situation, and people pushed it through, and the regime changed.
Yes.
I think that it's way more likely it would be like this. It's a revolution, but it's a very fast revolution which happens in the capital, and it's one major push of our forces, very quick one. Not a long fighting with us taking first Belgorod and then Bryansk and then Oryol and then Tula, and months of fighting, and then we are in Moscow. No, I don't think that's the way how we can proceed. We need to capture Moscow once and for all.
It's so interesting, the parallels, ironically, between Ukraine and Russia. Generally, we think, Russia, and you talk about this in the book being, Does Putin Have to Die? This was one of the most surprising parts of the book is, when you make the point, and I may not be able to say it, I can't say it as eloquently as you do, but, we think of Russia as kind of the mothership and Ukraine as this little satellite down here. And you make the point, it's really the other way around, that the mothership is really Ukraine and Russia is the subset. But this is a perfect case where the Ukrainian people have had two revolutions in the last 30 years? They are where they are today because they took control of the government by the people and demanded a government of the people. And it just seems to me so ironic that the Russian population could learn so much from Ukrainians and the recent history of Ukrainian. And sometimes I just wonder, how do you get that transfer of knowledge? Because the Ukrainians obviously will be better off when there's a Russian revolution as well.
Well, I would put it yes and no. Because when the Soviet Union was collapsing, and when the perestroika was happening, Russians were way more active than Ukrainians, way more active. And Ukraine would not be free if not processes that were going in Moscow. They were way larger in scale, way more decisive, and way more far-going. Then the problem was that in all the mass processes, you need a combination of both elite uprising and the popular uprising. It needs to be combined. The elites should not be united. It has to be a certain part which is with the people and which would open certain locks for the movement. And in Ukraine, elite was always divided. So that's why mass media were never monopolized. And in all these events on the streets, these Maidans, uprisings, in 1991, and then in 2004, and then in 2014, always part of the elites, significant part of the parliament, was with the people on the streets. In Russia, the last example of this was in 1993. And at that time, it was way more violent than it was during any of Maidans in Ukraine. It was way more serious fight with tanks, with thousands of deaths. It was nothing like during Maidan. But after that, the elites got consolidated because of the privatization processes. So they were simply included in the system when there was a certain vicious circle of financial interdependencies.
Yes.
And Putin mastered this. And that's why right now we are in the situation when there is no popular uprising possible because it doesn't have this link with elites. Elites, it's one people, and all the rest are another people. It's
Yes.
like two different nations within one country. And you need to break this ceiling, which is very visible for everyone. And that's why you need force to achieve this. You need to scare people and to make some of them flee.
And I'm guessing that it was by design that this consolidation happened because there was an understanding that, if we control the elites, we control the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you can manipulate everything with all the media in one hand, all the money in one hand. No political movement is feasible because, again, if we're talking about a non-violent, just normal political movement, it's all about money.
Yes.
At the end of the day, it's about all different types of resources, about access to media, access to experts, access to international politics. And the international community, by the way, was helping to build the same system because our beloved liberals, so-called liberals, people who identify them as liberals, they are not so much liberal. They were saying, "Oh, these awful people, which are dreaming of returning back to the Soviet Union. We are the progressors, so you should link your support with us exclusively." And that's why they also cemented this system, which then turned against them, and now they all in the West complaining about Putin, but they were the creators of Putinism.
All right, I want to wrap things up. I want to ask you about something on behalf of one of our very loyal viewers. Her name is Anna. She emailed me. Anna.
Yes.
Hello, Anna. She emailed me after our last interview last week and asked me to ask you your thoughts about those Western companies like Unilever and Shell, Nestle. What are your thoughts on these companies that continue to do business in Russia, even though they're Western companies and even though there's public protests against it in the West?
There is no crime which capital would not do for 100% of profit, as was said once by Mr. Marx. And what we are witnessing now is exactly the confirmation of this words. And to me, it actually relates almost equally to the companies which are still working in Russia and which prefer to leave Russia. Because those who were leaving, they were selling their businesses for peanuts, for certain local managers, and as the result, the regime benefited a lot because it now has more people who acquired the stolen, and which for this reason are by definition is extremely loyal to the regime. They improved the trade balance because they essentially zeroed the liabilities, the obligations that those businesses had for the investors. And because of that, the money stayed in Russia, and they financed the war through taxes. So those who left, they also helped, just in a different way. They look nice, and many of them benefited in terms of their market value because they receive that we are so appealing. But economically, this behavior was not positive. The only correct behavior is just to stop the production in Russia, to suspend it for a while. It's not a long period of time. Just put a lock on your factory. Don't let it be run by others. If you stop the factory, if you stop production, if there is no somebody else who produces Coca-Cola in Russia, because Coca-Cola is still being produced in Russia just by some Turkish company, which they still manufacture on the same factory. You know, so Russians didn't see that they have been hurt, and that's really bad.
So in a sense, what you're saying to people of the West is this is a if you want to support Ukraine and even a free Russia, spending your time focused on companies like Unilever is really just a distraction because it doesn't really matter and there's better uses of your time and your resources.
No, I think it's still a good thing, but it's a good thing again to pressure them in the right direction. There is no use when a major supermarket is being sold to just another network which is Russian, because then the consumers, they would not feel the difference, and the budget would even benefit from this. So it's not a win-win; it's a lose-lose situation. What we should vouch for is to suspend the production, to stop it for a while. Then it would be resumed, and it would be even better. And people who are thinking long-term enough, you know, by suffering for a year or two, they would receive way better benefits with a new government and with a new investment climate, which would be in Russia after that. And what's happening now, of course, we are taking notes on who behaved, you know, in which way, and be sure that you know, we have good memory in this regard.
Yeah, this is a topic for a longer conversation, maybe next week. But I suspect that part of this is that there's always this fear in the West that, or this theory in the West, we shouldn't punish the Russian people. And yet I suspect the real long-term change will only come when the Russian people suffer. And so closing the factory, the people that work there suffer and the customers suffer, and it gets their attention, and then they realize things suck.
Yeah, it's again, unfortunately, when you are a surgeon and you have a patient who is sick, you make him suffer to cure him. And when he has cancer, you do chemotherapy, which makes a person really sick. But he would recover at the end of the day, and that's exactly what we should do. And again, just remember World War II. Germans, ordinary Germans, did suffer. They did suffer a lot, but that helped to stop the war. Right now, Ukrainians, they suffer way more than whatever we can do to make Russians suffer. But we need a wake-up call. And when the Western companies actually help to polish things, no, that's not good.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to let you go. Thanks for talking with us again. I hope we'll get a chance to talk again next week. It's great to see you again, Ilya. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Always my pleasure.